What happens when a seemingly ordinary school hides a dark secret beneath its walls? Emma thought it was just another back-to-school prep day, but the bell rang too early, the footsteps echoed when no one was there, and the doors, they weren't locked. Step into the eerie halls of Hawthorne Middle School, where the supernatural lurks behind every corner and the watcher waits, ready to claim its next victim. Will Emma escape the school's grasp, or is she already trapped in a nightmare that no one can wake her from? Find out if she survives back-to-school hauntings. Back-to-school hauntings is not your average school story. What begins as a simple back-to-school preparation for Emma, a quiet and curious teenager, quickly escalates into a chilling encounter with something far beyond her understanding. The strange happenings in Hawthorne Middle School, a school she thought she knew well, take a terrifying turn when she stumbles upon a hidden secret. A locked door, an ancient journal, and a shadowy figure known as the Watcher lead her on a terrifying journey through the school's twisted corridors and deep into a dark mystery that has haunted the school for years. Emma's struggle to understand what's happening becomes an all-consuming obsession. Each night, the whispers grow louder, the shadows closer, and the school itself seems to warp, bending under the weight of an unknown force. The Watcher, something old and dark, follows her every move, and Emma realizes she's not just being haunted by a ghost, she's being hunted by something much more sinister. Will Emma be able to uncover the truth about Hawthorne Middle School before it's too late? Or will she fall victim to the same fate as those who came before her, trapped in the school's dark grip forever? This story will pull you deep into its mystery, keeping you on the edge of your seat as Emma faces the supernatural, the unknown, and the terror lurking right behind the walls of the school. If you enjoy spine-chilling tales of haunted places and twisted mysteries, Back-to-School Hauntings will keep you hooked from start to finish. Emma stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, her fingers tightening around the strap of her camera bag. The sound of the school bell still echoed faintly in her ears. It wasn't just any bell. It was the bell, the one that rang at the start of each school day. But this morning wasn't a school day. It was 2 weeks before classes started, and the building was supposed to be completely empty, aside from a few teachers preparing their rooms. She glanced behind her, half expecting someone to step out from a classroom with a sheepish smile, maybe someone testing the system or pulling a prank. But there was no one, just silence. The hallway stretched out in both directions, bathed in the pale light from the old fluorescent fixtures above. Some flickered, humming softly. The building smelled faintly of dust, cleaning supplies, and warm wood from the floor, polishers. It was familiar, comforting even, but something about it now felt off. Then she saw them. Footprints. Large, wet, muddy prints stamped right onto the polished floor, leading from the double doors of the gym toward the library. They were fresh. The moisture hadn't even started to dry. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Her logical mind tried to explain it. Maybe a janitor had come in through the side entrance. Maybe a maintenance worker in dirty boots. But she knew Mr. Daniels, the janitor. He always kept the place spotless, and he never left mud on the floors, not even in the middle of winter, and there had been no cars in the parking lot when she arrived. Emma raised her camera instinctively, snapping a photo of the footprints. The shutter clicked sharply, breaking the silence. She reviewed the image on the screen, zooming in. 5 toes. Deep impressions. The mud looked strange. Dark, almost black, like it came from a place far wetter than the dry sidewalks outside. Curiosity tugged at her like a string around her ribs. It wouldn't let her walk away. She followed the prints. Each step made her more alert. The stillness of the building seemed to deepen around her. Doors to empty classrooms stood slightly ajar, revealing rows of dark desks and forgotten posters curling on the walls. The ticking of the big hallway clock echoed too loudly. When she glanced up at it, it read 7:41 a.m. But it had been 7:41, 5 minutes ago, hadn't it? The footprints led around the corner where the lights grew dimmer. Emma slowed her steps, her sneakers silent against the floor. A draft touched her cheek, cold and sudden like a breath from an open window. But she saw no windows nearby. "Hello?" she called softly, her voice trembling before she could steady it. "Is someone there?" Her voice bounced down the hallway and returned to her with no answer. Just more silence. As she approached the end of the hallway, the footprints suddenly stopped, right in front of the library door. Emma stared at the door, heart pounding. It was locked. A thick silver padlock hung from the handle. But that didn't make sense. She had come to the library just last week with Miss Carter to sort some books. It hadn't been locked then. Emma knelt beside the last footprint. It was perfectly shaped, like the person had stood there for a moment, and then disappeared. No, more prints. No return trail. No exit. She slowly stood, her eyes drawn to the small square window in the library door. It was fogged with dust, but she leaned in and cupped her hands around her eyes to see better. For a moment, she saw nothing. Then something moved. Just a flicker. A shape. A person. An animal. She blinked. The room was still. Emma took a step back, the fine hairs on her arms rising. She swallowed hard and glanced back down the hallway toward the exit. A small part of her whispered that now would be a good time to leave, to pretend she hadn't seen anything, to forget the whole thing. But another part, the braver part, tightened her grip on the camera and took a slow, deep breath. There was something inside that library, and whatever it was, it didn't want to be found. Emma's fingers lingered on the cold metal of the library's doorknob, even though she knew it wouldn't turn. The padlock was still there, thick, dull, and strangely old-looking, like something out of a horror movie rather than a middle school. Its surface was rough and weather-worn, not like the shiny new locks the school usually used. It felt out of place. She gave the handle a cautious twist anyway. Nothing. The door held firm. Inside, the library sat in heavy silence, cloaked in shadows. The lights were off, but her eyes were adjusting. Rows of bookshelves formed long, dark corridors. Inside. A place that had always felt safe, warm even, now looked like a maze of secrets. She pressed her forehead gently against the glass, trying to see more clearly. For a second, everything was still. Then, something shifted near the back of the room. It was subtle, like the brief flutter of movement in a dream, too fast to identify, too real to ignore. A tall, dark shape had slipped between the shelves, not quite walking, more like gliding. Emma jerked back, heart leaping into her throat. The hallway behind her remained silent. She checked her phone again. Still no messages from Ms. Carter. Still no calls, and the time, 7:41, unchanged. She frowned and hit the side button. The screen went black. Then she tapped it again. 41. Again, was her phone frozen? She restarted it, watching the glowing logo pulse against the black screen. When it came back to life, the time was exactly the same. It hadn't moved, neither had the battery percentage. It was as if time had stopped. Or, at least, it had stopped here. Emma took a step back from the door, her thoughts racing. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, but it was like the building didn't want her to leave. It had drawn her in with that ringing bell and now was wrapping her in layers of silence and shadows, like a spider spinning its web. She needed to find someone. Anyone. She turned and walked quickly down the hallway, her shoes squeaking faintly on the polished floor. The front office wasn't far, just past the trophy case and across from the teacher's lounge. Her footsteps echoed more than they should have, as if the halls had suddenly grown wider, emptier. She reached the office and pushed the glass door open. Empty. The lights were on, buzzing faintly overhead. Desks sat neatly arranged, chairs tucked in, computer screens dark. The usual warm scent of coffee and paper was missing. There was no sign of Ms. Carter. No voices, no movement, just an eerie, lifeless calm. Emma stepped inside and glanced at the wall clock above the receptionist's desk. 13. She blinked. "What?" she whispered. The hallway clock said 7:41. Her phone said 7:41. But here, in the office, time had rolled backward, 28 minutes, frozen in place. A quiet chill passed over her skin. She walked closer, staring at the motionless hands on the clock. They looked almost stuck, like someone had glued them in place. On the desk below, it was a calendar. August, with Teacher Prep Week written in looping blue pen. Today's square was circled with a heart and the words, "Welcome back, Ms. Carter." Emma felt a sudden tightness in her chest. She had come to help Ms. Carter decorate her classroom. That was the plan. But now it felt like she had stepped into some version of the school that wasn't meant to be seen. Then she noticed the file cabinet drawer was slightly open. Curious, she reached out and pulled it the rest of the way. Inside were folders, neatly labeled with student names. A.D., E.H., and then her name, Emma Lively. She hesitated. The folder looked newer than the others. Less dust. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, Emma Lively, selected. Observation begins. Do not disturb the library door. Her stomach turned cold. She read it again as if the words might change, but they didn't. Selected. For what? She stepped back, the folder slipping from her, hands and scattering papers across the floor. She didn't bother picking them up. Something was happening here. Something deep, hidden, and dangerous. And it was clear now. Whatever was behind that locked library door, someone didn't want her to find it. But it was already too late. She had found it. Emma's footsteps echoed through the hallway as she walked briskly away from the office. The file's words burned into her mind. Selected. Observation begins. Do not disturb the library door. Who had written that? Why her? She wrapped her arms around herself as she passed the lockers, all closed neatly in a row, except for one. Locker 213 was open just a crack, like someone had forgotten to shut it all the way. As she moved past it, a sudden chill brushed her neck. Again, feather-light but sharp enough to make her turn. No one. She sighed and kept walking, heading toward the lost and found cabinet at the far end of the main hallway. It was near the gym entrance, and she remembered seeing a flashlight there once during a school cleanup. She stopped at the small wooden cabinet tucked beneath the school's faded mascot mural. A wildcat that now looked more like a smudge of forgotten paint. The cabinet creaked as she opened it. Inside, a single glove, a dented lunchbox, 3 mismatched shoes, and something resting flat against the bottom shelf. A book. No, not a book, a journal. It was small, black, and bound in cracked leather. Dust clung to its edges, but the cover was oddly clean in the center, like it had been touched often, maybe even held tightly by nervous hands. Emma hesitated, then picked it up. It felt warm, like it had been sitting in the sun, though the cabinet had been cold as stone. The first page was torn at the corner, but the second was intact. My Last Year at Hawthorne, by Jacob W. The handwriting was messy, a mixture, of sharp strokes and hurried loops. A kid's writing, someone maybe her age or a little older. She flipped to the next page. Day 14. The bell rang again today, but only I heard it. I asked Ms. Sims and the janitor. They looked at me like I was imagining things, but I know it rang. Just like last week, just like last summer. Emma's eyes widened. This Jacob had heard the bell, too? She sat down on the hallway bench, the journal trembling slightly in her hands. She turned the page. There are footprints again. Wet ones. Big. Too big. I followed them, and they led to the library. Always to the library. The door was locked, but I saw something inside. I think it saw me, too. Emma's pulse quickened. She scanned further. Day 23, I found a door behind the bookcase. It wasn't there before, or maybe it was, and I just wasn't ready to see it yet. It had no knob, just a small hole where a key should go. Day 27, I dreamed I was inside the library. But it wasn't our library. The shelves were endless. The books whispered. One of them knew my name. When I woke up, my hands were covered in ink. She flipped faster now, each entry darker, more frantic. Day 35. I think the school is watching me. Not the people, the building. The walls shift when I'm alone. Clocks freeze. Time bends. I left my recorder in the gym overnight. It picked up footsteps, whispers, breathing. But no one was there. Emma paused. The entries went on, page after page. She noticed how the handwriting changed. It started neat, confident. But by page 40, it was jagged, like Jacob had been writing, in a panic or maybe in the dark. Then she reached the final entry. Day 49. I'm going back into the library. I have the key now. Found it in the lost and found. How did they know? Who left it there? Doesn't matter. I'm ready. I need to know what's behind the bookcase. I need to know what it wants. If someone finds this journal, leave. Don't open the door. Don't let it see you. And if it already has, run. The rest of the page was stained. Not with ink, but something darker. Water damage, maybe, or something else. The last line was barely legible. Not alone. Here. Emma sat frozen on the bench, her ears suddenly aware of every sound, or lack of sound, in the hallway. Even the buzzing of the lights had gone still. She looked up, and every locker door down the hallway, left and right, was now wide open. Every single one. Slowly, soundlessly. Emma stood, clutching the journal to her chest. Her mind raced. Jacob had found the door. Jacob had been inside the library, and now Jacob was gone. But his warning came too late. Because Emma had already seen the door, and something behind it had already seen her. Emma didn't remember choosing to walk back to the library. Her feet moved on their own, silent against the tile as if drawn by invisible threads. The journal was still pressed tightly against her chest. She hadn't dared put it back in her bag. It felt wrong to let it out of her hands. The hallway seemed longer than before, the ceiling lights dimmer. The air had thickened somehow. Heavy like a summer storm was waiting just beyond the windows. But the sky outside was still, a pale gray wash, like an old photograph fading at the edges. She paused when she reached the corner. The library door stood just ahead, still locked, still silent. And yet, somehow, it felt like it was waiting for her. Emma glanced down at the journal and remembered the last entry. Jacob had found a key. In the lost and found, her hand slipped into her hoodie pocket and she stopped cold. There it was, a small, cold key. She didn't remember putting it there. She didn't remember touching it. But somehow, it was there now, nestled beside her fingers like it had been waiting. Her breath caught in her throat. How long had it been there? She stepped forward, slid the key into the padlock. It turned with a click, smoother than it should have. The padlock dropped into her hand like it weighed nothing at all. The door creaked open with a low groan, like it hadn't been opened in years. The air inside was dense and cool, smelling of old books and something else. Something faintly metallic. Dust danced in the beams of pale light from the tall windows, painting shifting shadows on the floor. Emma stepped inside. The library looked the same at first. Shelves lined with worn-out books, rows of wooden tables, a few old computers in the far corner. But the silence was different. It wasn't the peaceful stillness she remembered. It was charged. Listening. She closed the door behind her, and the latch clicked quietly. Every step she took made the old wooden floor creak. She walked. Past the reading corner, past the biography section, until she reached the back wall. The tall bookcase stood before her like a sentry. Massive, old, slightly tilted. Dust coated its top like snow, and several of the books looked untouched for decades. But now that she was close, she could feel something behind it. A faint draft stirred the hair at the back of her neck. She reached out and placed her hand flat against the side of the bookcase. It was colder than the air around her. She pushed. At first, nothing. Then, with a deep, groaning creak, the bookcase began to shift. Not much, just an inch, then 2. Dust flew out in a cloud, making her cough. Behind it, tucked in the wall like a secret, was a door, shorter than a regular door, narrow, made of old wood, the color of ash. There was no handle, just a small, dark keyhole. Emma stepped back. The key. Jacob had said it opened the door behind the bookcase. She pulled it from her pocket again, the metal now warm in her hand. As she slid it into the keyhole, a faint click echoed in the silence. The door opened on its own, just a few inches. Emma hesitated, heart pounding in her ears. Her instincts screamed at her to stop, to run, to leave the school and never come back. But she also knew something deeper, something she couldn't explain, was waiting for her beyond that door. Something that had waited for Jacob. Something that had been waiting for someone like her. She pushed the door open all the way and stepped through. The room was nothing like the library. Stone walls surrounded her, rough and gray, slick with damp in places. The ceiling was low, supported by thick wooden beams that creaked quietly. The floor beneath her sneakers was stone, cold and uneven. There were no books in here, only silence and a desk. It sat alone in the center of the room, an old, cracked wooden desk covered in scraps of paper, broken pencils, and a flickering lamp that buzzed softly, though she could see no cord, no outlet. A faint light glowed from the base of the walls, pulsing slowly, like the heartbeat of the building itself. She stepped closer. The papers on the desk were covered in scribbled words, drawings, diagrams. Some showing the layout of the school, others showing doors, keys, and clocks with no hands. One sheet had her name written again and again in different handwriting. Emma. 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 Next to the desk was a small chalkboard leaning against the wall. Names were written in a neat column. Many had been crossed out. A few were circled. Her name was at the bottom, not crossed out, not circled, just there, written in fresh white chalk with today's date beside it. Her breathing turned shallow. That's when she heard it. The softest creak. From the far corner of the room, Emma turned. Shadow was standing there, tall, still, just out of the light, not moving, not breathing, but watching. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The shadow took a slow step forward. No face, no eyes, just a shape. And yet, somehow, it radiated something ancient. Not evil exactly, but not kind either. Like it had been waiting far too long. Then it spoke. Not with words. With thoughts. You saw the bell. You followed the steps. You opened the door. You are awake now. Emma stumbled back, knocking into the desk. The lamp flickered, then flared bright, revealing something on the wall behind. The shadow. A mirror. But when she looked into it, she didn't see her reflection. She saw the library. Empty. Dark, and in the corner she saw Jacob, frozen in place as if trapped behind glass. His eyes wide, mouth slightly open, his hand pressed flat against the mirror. Emma spun around, but he wasn't there. Only the shadow, only the silence. Only her name, glowing faintly in chalk on the board behind her. Emma's breath came in short, silent gasps. The air inside the hidden room was cold. Not school cold, like an overactive air conditioner. This was a deep, biting cold. The kind that crept into your bones. The kind that whispered through cracks and seemed to settle beneath your skin. She took a cautious step away from the mirror, eyes flicking back to the image of Jacob. He was still there, motionless, pale, like a memory caught mid-thought. His hand pressed against the glass hadn't moved. His mouth was frozen slightly open like he had tried to scream once, but never finished. Emma turned to face the shadow in the corner again. It was gone. Not disappeared. Moved. Now it stood directly, beside the desk, where the flickering lamp cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch too far across the stone floor. But the figure, faceless, formless, stood motionless, watching, waiting. Emma backed away until her heel hit the edge of a raised platform she hadn't noticed before. It was built into the stone wall, an old wooden trapdoor, reinforced with metal, sealed shut by two rusted latches. On top of it, carved deep into the wood, was a symbol. A circle, intersected by a line. Through the circle, a vertical eye. She had seen it before, in the journal. On the last page beneath the words, "Not alone here," that same symbol had been drawn. Twice. Her fingers trembled. As she knelt beside the trapdoor, she reached down and, hesitating only a moment, unlatched both locks with a heavy clunk. The door creaked open on hinges that groaned like a moaning voice from beneath the earth. A wave of air drifted up from the darkness below, stale, damp, and metallic. Emma aimed her flashlight phone down into the opening. The stairs were narrow and spiraled into pitch blackness. Stone steps slick with moisture and something darker she didn't want to name. From behind her, the lamp on the desk buzzed again, then went out. Total darkness swallowed the room. Her flashlight flickered. "No, no, no," she whispered, shaking. The phone. It stabilized, barely. In the dim cone of light, the mirror now reflected the room she was in. But she wasn't in it anymore. Instead, Jacob stood there now, in her place. Only this time, he wasn't frozen. He looked straight at her. His lips moved, slowly, carefully. She could only make out two words. "Don't stay." Emma turned and lowered herself into the stairwell. The stone was wet beneath her hands. The walls seemed to breathe. Each step down echoed unnaturally, repeating and repeating like the sound didn't want to fade. She descended into the dark. The bottom, the stairs, opened into a second chamber. Smaller. Stranger. There were no books, no desks, no signs of this being part of any school at all. Instead, the walls were covered in old drawings, childlike scribbles etched into the stone with chalk, nails, or worse. Dozens of stick figures, all facing one direction. A crude door with eyes carved into it and words scrawled above it. They saw it. Now they're inside. Emma's flashlight flickered again and steadied, revealing more strange symbols. Names, scratched in hundreds of tiny letters across every surface. Some were repeated. Some were crossed out. And then she saw it again. Her own name, scratched freshly on the ceiling above her head. Emma Lively, and just beneath it, a date. Today's. Her knees went weak. She spun around, and there it was. A second mirror, not like the one above. This one was tall, cracked across one corner, and leaned up against the far wall like someone had dropped it there in a hurry. She approached it slowly. Her reflection stared back, dim and warped. But behind her, in the mirror, she saw the shadow again. Tall, faceless, rising behind her like smoke from a fire. She turned. Nothing there. She turned back to the mirror. Jacob stood in it again. But this time, he was screaming, mouth wide, silent, hands pounding on the inside of the glass. Behind him, more faces began to emerge. Dozens. Students of all ages, pale and flickering like half-lit film images, trapped. A low hum vibrated through the room. Emma dropped to her knees and looked beneath the mirror. Wires, tubes, strange old electronics connected to the stone floor. And a switch. Rusted, but still working. She hesitated, then flipped it. The mirror shattered. Light poured out from the cracks, blinding like lightning had struck underwater. For one brief moment she felt a rush of air, a roar of something ancient and angry pulling itself loose. A scream, not hers, not Jacob's, rose from the stone floor, echoing up the stairs, rattling the bones of the school above. Then silence. Emma blinked against the fading light. The mirror was gone. In its place was only the stone wall, and an opening, a tunnel, lit with flickering lights. She walked forward, slowly, unsure of what she was chasing now, truth, escape, or both. But one thing was certain. This place, this hidden room beneath the school, wasn't just built by hands. It was grown. It lived, and it remembered. Emma's heart beat wildly in her chest, each thud like a drumbeat of impending doom. The tunnel ahead, stretched dark and unyielding, lit only by the faint flicker of lights that hung from the ceiling, casting long, wavering shadows against the damp stone walls. It felt like she was moving through a place forgotten by time, an underworld beneath. The school, designed not for learning, but for keeping something. Her breath came in quick bursts. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders, but it did little to protect her from the cold that seemed to crawl from the very walls. Every step she took echoed in the narrow corridor, too loud, too alive. She paused at every creak of wood, every gust of air that seemed to whisper along the walls, but the sounds never seemed to come from her. They were always just ahead, always watching. The walls here felt different. Rough, raw, like the earth itself had birthed this place long before the school was ever built. The stone underfoot was uneven, damp in places, slick with something that felt like grease, or worse. Her flashlight caught strange markings along the floor, scratches, gouges, faint impressions of things that had once been dragged, pulled. She kept walking. The tunnel grew narrower as she descended. The flickering lights dimmed, flickering in, and out as if on the edge of power. The deeper she went, the more oppressive the air became. It was heavier now, as though something was pulling the oxygen from her lungs, making each breath harder. Her legs ached, her throat dry, but she kept moving. Then the tunnel opened up. The space widened into a chamber that seemed to stretch far beyond the size of the school above. Her flashlight beam barely reached the other side of the room. No walls, no ceiling, just a vast, empty darkness, broken only by rows of tall, thin pillars that rose like dead trees from the stone floor. There were hundreds of them, stretching far into the blackness, standing in eerily perfect alignment. Each pillar was adorned with symbols, strange runes, words, and sketches, etched deep into the surface. Her breath caught as she realized the truth. These weren't just symbols. They were eyes, hundreds of them. The eyes of students, past and present. And there, in the center of the room, a pedestal stood, holding something covered by a dark cloth. But even without seeing it, Emma knew what it was. She had seen it in her dreams. The thing that watched, the thing that waited. She stepped forward, the air growing colder the closer she came to the pedestal. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. A shadow moved in the corner of her eye and she whipped around, heart pounding. Nothing, just more darkness. More eyes. Then she heard it, a low hum, so quiet at first that she thought it might be the wind. But it grew louder and louder still, like 1,000 whispers, like the creaking of ancient wood, like the scratching of claws against stone. It was coming from all around her. Emma spun again, this time with a sense of panic rising in her chest. She knew she was not alone. Something was watching her, something close. The air seemed to thicken, pushing in on her from every direction. Her flashlight flickered again. Don't look behind you. The thought came so suddenly, so clearly that Emma froze. She didn't look. Not yet. Instead, she stared at the pedestal, willing herself forward. She reached out, trembling hands brushing against the cloth. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, she yanked the cloth away. Underneath, there was a mirror, but not just any mirror. This one was framed with the same symbols, the same eyes, as the pillars. It was larger, taller, with intricate designs, etched into the silvered glass. And within the reflection, Emma didn't see herself. No. She saw the Watcher. The figure was tall, impossibly thin, its body made of shadow and light. No distinct features, no face, just the presence of something, ancient and far older than the school above. It was the same shadow she had seen before, when she first opened the hidden door, when she stepped into the library. Only now, it wasn't just standing in the corner. Now, it was staring right at her. It didn't move. It didn't need to. But, as she gazed into the mirror, she felt it piercing her soul, as though it could see everything. Every fear, every secret she had ever tried to bury. It was reading her, understanding her in ways that no one could. She could feel its gaze crawl under her skin, making her bones ache, making her heart race with terror. Her mouth went dry. The Watcher knew her, and it was about to reveal everything. The room seemed to tremble. The air thickened with the hum of its presence. A voice, low, guttural, and ancient, whispered through the chamber. I have seen you. I have watched. You are mine now. Emma's chest tightened. She backed away from the mirror, but her legs felt as if they were made of stone. The eyes in the pillars seemed to blink, their gaze shifting as they followed her every move. It wasn't a physical touch that pressed against her now. It was something far deeper, like a presence that suffocated her mind. The Watcher was in her head, drowning her in its thoughts, in its voice. The room seemed to contract around her. The shadows lengthened, twisted, until they closed in like a net, hemming her in, cutting off her escape. Emma's body trembled, but she forced herself to move. Get out. It was the only thought in her mind now. She turned, stumbling backward toward the tunnel, but the shadows clung to her like thick fog, dragging at her limbs, pulling her closer to the mirror. Her flashlight flickered once more, casting the room in brief, chaotic flashes of light. The Watcher spoke again. "You cannot escape me. You will never leave." Her foot caught on something, and she fell forward, her face inches from the mirror. For one terrible moment she saw herself reflected, but her face wasn't the same. It was twisted. Her eyes wide, mouth stretched in a silent scream, her body contorted in a way that couldn't be real. Then, before she could look away, she saw something worse. The Watcher stepped out of the mirror, tall, thin, inhuman. Its shape was shifting now, growing, swirling with darkness and smoke. Its arms reached for her, long and endless, fingers that twisted like tendrils. But Emma didn't scream. Not this time. Instead, she turned and ran. The sound of her breathing filled Emma's ears, loud and erratic as she sprinted through the dark tunnel, her footfalls echoing against the stone walls. The Watcher was behind her. She knew it. She could feel its presence pressing down on her, its dark tendrils of shadow latching onto her heels like cold, skeletal hands. She didn't dare look back. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Faster, harder, don't stop. But the tunnel stretched before her, seemingly endless. The flickering light from her phone's flashlight barely illuminated the way, casting jagged, elongated shadows that twisted and writhed, as though the walls themselves were alive, closing in on her. The air felt thicker, suffocating, each breath more labored than the last. She could still hear the Watcher's whispers, low, guttural sounds that scraped at her mind. It was toying with her now, trying to make her doubt her steps, to slow her down, to trap her. "You can't escape." The voice wasn't spoken aloud. It thrummed in her bones, a vibration in the air itself, a pulse that felt like it was coming from deep inside the walls. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails biting into her palms, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She had to get out. She had to get out. Her legs burned as she ran, muscles aching, but there was no way she was going to let it catch her. She wasn't going to let the Watcher win. Not after everything it had already stolen. Jacob, all the other students whose names she'd seen etched in the stone, their faces trapped in the mirror. Her foot slipped on the slick floor, but she caught herself, pushing forward again, heart pounding like thunder in her chest. She rounded the corner, her flashlight darting across the narrow corridor until she reached the stairs, the same stone steps that had led her down into the dark heart of the school. But when she turned to climb them, the air around her seemed to warp. The staircase wasn't right. It wasn't the same staircase she had descended. The walls were taller now, the steps steeper, the shadows deeper. It was closing in. The space was narrowing. She stepped up, but the steps felt wrong. Too close, too tight. Her breath quickened, panic beginning to claw at her mind. She couldn't breathe. The walls were shifting. Her feet flew faster, each step a desperate plea to escape. The light from her phone flickered, sputtered, before cutting out. Entirely. She was plunged into total darkness. No, 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 no. She stumbled, her hands scraping against the cold stone of the walls as she tried to steady herself. But something was in the dark with her. She could feel it. A presence just beyond her reach. Its breath colder than the air. Its movement silent and predatory. Her heart hammered in her chest as she pressed on, hands blindly searching for something, anything to hold on to. The light flickered back to life, just enough to see a faint outline ahead. The exit. She surged, forward with everything she had left, her legs like lead, the weight of fear and exhaustion pressing down on her. But she wasn't stopping. Not now. Not when she was so close. She reached the top of the stairs and slammed into the wooden door, her shoulder crashing into it. The door groaned as if reluctant to open, but she didn't hesitate. She shoved harder, the sound of the hinges grinding loudly in the silence, until, finally, she burst through. She was back in the hallway, back in the school, but it wasn't the same. Everything was wrong. The walls were stained with age, the floors warped, the lights overhead buzzed with a broken, erratic hum. It looked like her school, but twisted, corrupted, decayed. The air tasted different, stale and heavy with something bitter, something ancient. And there it was. The bell. It rang again, low and hollow, reverberating through the air. Emma's stomach turned at the sound, her feet frozen to the floor. She knew what it meant. She knew what it had meant all along. This was the beginning. She could feel the watcher's gaze on her, though she didn't see it. Not physically. It was deeper. A cold presence that wrapped itself around her mind like chains, binding her to this place, to this twisted reality. She had escaped the tunnel, but she hadn't escaped it. She wasn't free. The footsteps began. Slow, methodical. It was walking toward her, not from the dark, but from everywhere. Her chest tightened, breath caught in her throat as she backed away, her eyes scanning the hallway in a panic. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't let it catch her again. Not now, not after everything she'd just learned. She turned, not thinking, just moving. She sprinted down the hall, past the classrooms, past the darkened windows, her sneakers slapping against the floor. The watcher was close. She could feel it, its presence at her back, pulling at her, seeping into her mind like cold water creeping up from the floor. But she ran. She had to. She reached the double doors of the school's front exit. The cold metal handle was slick with something, sweat or something else, and her fingers slid off it as she jerked the door open. It swung wide, and she was outside. But the moment she stepped onto the pavement, the school behind her seemed to shift again. The windows, once dark, now flickered with dim light. Shadows moved behind them. The bell continued to toll, an unholy sound, as though calling her back. A distant scream echoed through the air. Emma stumbled, her mind reeling. The night sky was clear above her, stars twinkling like little pinpricks of light in the blackness, and yet the chill that had followed her inside still clung to her skin. She could feel it creeping up her spine, could feel the watcher reaching out, touching the edges of her mind. It had seen her. It had marked her, and though she had escaped the darkened halls of Hawthorne, she knew that the watcher was still out there, waiting. The sun rose the next morning, a pale sliver of light cutting through the edges of the blinds, but the light felt hollow, distant. Emma stared at the slivers of sunlight stretching across, her bedspread, her body frozen, her mind still tangled in the darkness she'd left behind. She hadn't slept, not a single minute. Her eyes felt like lead. Her body ached as if she'd run a marathon, her pulse still erratic from the night before. The events of the hidden room, the mirror, the watcher, it all played over and over in her mind like a broken record. The watcher's voice, its cold presence, the overwhelming feeling of being watched, pursued, and ultimately trapped. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw its shadow flicker in the corner of her vision, its fingers reaching, growing. She rubbed her face, trying to force herself back into reality. You're safe now. You're out. But the words felt hollow. She rolled out of bed, the floor beneath her cold. Her bare feet shuffled across the room, toward the desk where she had left her phone the night before. The screen blinked to life as she picked it up. No new messages. No missed calls. Her finger hesitated as it hovered over the screen. She had told no one, about what she had seen, what she had experienced. Who would believe her? Who could understand the things she had witnessed? The thought gnawed at her. She needed to talk to someone. But even more, she needed to understand. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Ms. Carter, the history teacher she had helped set up the classroom with. "Hey, Emma, just wanted to check in. I'm here early today. We're starting preparations for the year. Hope you're doing well." Emma's fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. She could feel her pulse quicken. She wanted to reply, but then she stopped herself. How could she explain what had happened? How could she tell Miss Carter about the bell ringing when no one else was there? About the footsteps, the journal, the watcher that had followed her into her own mind? She typed and deleted several responses before finally settling on one simple sentence. "I'm okay. I'll see you later today." With a deep breath, she sent the message and put her phone back down. The words felt like a lie, but it was all she could manage. Later that morning, she stood in front of Hawthorne Middle School. The doors were open, students trickling in from the parking lot, laughing, chatting, oblivious to the horror Emma had experienced just hours before. The school looked normal. There were no signs of the darkness she had felt. No cracked walls, no flickering lights. The bell rang, regular, steady, reassuring. Yet the sound still made her stomach twist. The memory of last night's toll echoing through her head, iti-qui. Glanced up at the windows, half expecting to see movement inside, shadows, faces. But the building was quiet, lifeless, just as it always had been. Nothing was out of place. She stood there for a moment, the weight of the school pressing down on her, the knowledge of what lay beneath it all weighing heavier than she had expected. Emma stepped through the doors and walked through the hallways, past students chatting, past the lockers, past the teachers preparing for the new school year. Her footsteps echoed louder than they should, her heart still racing. But she kept walking. She tried to act normal, to breathe normally, but it was impossible. There was a tension in her chest that wouldn't loosen. Every corner she turned, every step she took, she felt as though the walls were watching her, listening, waiting. When she reached the classroom where she was supposed to meet Ms. Carter, she froze. The door was slightly ajar, just like it had been the day before. She knocked lightly, but there was no answer. Tentatively, she pushed the door open. The room was empty. Not just empty, though. The air felt wrong. As she stepped inside, the silence was almost deafening. The chairs were arranged neatly, the chalkboard spotless, the desk at the front exactly where it had been. But something was missing. Something had changed. Emma's eyes were drawn to the corner of the room, where a bookshelf stood. She had helped organize the books there just days ago. Now, there were new books, piled high, stacked in a way that looked deliberate yet chaotic. She walked closer to inspect them, and there, buried beneath the books, was a familiar sight. The journal. Her stomach lurched as she reached for it, her fingers trembling as she opened the cover. The pages were blank, except for the first one. Her name was written there, Emma Lively, the same handwriting, the same symbols. But the rest of the page was blank. There were no entries, no descriptions, no frantic warnings. Just silence. She flipped through the rest of the journal. Page after page, blank. as if nothing had ever been written at all. A cold chill washed over her. How was this possible? Emma sat in the chair, gripping the journal tightly. Her thoughts swirled as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Had it all been a dream? Was the watcher gone? Had the school somehow erased everything from her mind, from the very fabric of the place itself? Her fingers traced the page again, the faintest trace of ink still visible beneath her touch. Something was there. Something had happened. She knew it, deep down. But the truth, whatever it was slipping through her fingers like smoke. Suddenly, the door opened. Ms. Carter stepped in, her smile wide and warm. "Hey there, you're early. Everything okay?" Emma jumped, startled. She looked at the teacher, her face pale, her mouth dry. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Ms. Carter raised an eyebrow. "Emma, you good?" Emma blinked and looked down at the journal again. "Yeah," she whispered, swallowing hard. "I'm fine." But as she sat there, with the journal closed and tucked beneath her arm, one thought crept into her mind like a slow, insidious whisper. The watcher hadn't gone. It was still there, watching, and it would never forget her. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. No matter how much she tried to bury it beneath the distractions of the school day, students talking, teachers lecturing, the hum of normalcy in the hallways, it always returned, creeping at the edges of her thoughts like a dark shadow. The watcher was still here. She could feel it. She had escaped the underground room, but the weight of its presence never left her. It lingered in every corner, in every flicker of light, in every gust of air that seemed to brush too close to her skin. She didn't talk about it. Not to Miss Carter, not to anyone. No one would understand, even if she tried. But in the dead of night, when the darkness settled deep around her, she would hear it. The whisper. It started softly at first, a slight rustling sound in the corner of her room. She would turn, expecting to see her desk chair moving, her window swaying in the breeze. But nothing was ever there. The whisper would fade, like it had never been. But then it came again. At first, it was just a faint murmur, the rustling of words that were impossible to decipher. As she lay in bed, trying to find sleep, the whisper would grow louder, more distinct, and then clearer, but not in any language she understood. It wasn't just words. It was a voice that crawled into her mind, slithering beneath her thoughts. Like an insect in the dark. "It knows you," it would say. "It remembers you." Emma squeezed her eyes shut, trying to ignore it, trying to block it out. The walls in her room seemed to close in, the air growing dense with the weight of the whisper like it was coming from inside her own head. It was the watcher. The same force that had followed her in the tunnels, the same presence that had watched her through the mirror. But now, it was different. It was closer. That afternoon, Emma walked through the school with a knot in her stomach. She couldn't concentrate in class, couldn't focus on the lessons. Every creak of the floorboards, every murmur of voices, felt too loud, too present. The school itself seemed to vibrate with an energy that unsettled her. As she passed the library, she stopped. It was the door she had once opened, the one she had escaped from. It looked completely ordinary now, just another door in, the hall. But Emma knew better. Her hand hovered over the handle, and for a moment, she thought she heard a soft creak from the other side. "It's still there," she thought. The whisper wasn't just in her head anymore. It was here. "You can't escape me. You're already inside." The words seemed to press against her chest, a physical weight that squeezed her breath out of her. She flinched back from the door, her heart racing, her skin prickling with the sudden sensation of being watched. She glanced around. The hallway was empty. No one noticed her. She rushed down the hall trying to shake off the feeling of cold fingers crawling up her spine, but the whisper followed her. It didn't matter how fast she walked, how quickly she turned corners. It was there, like a shadow that clung to her every movement. By the time she reached the courtyard outside, the sky was a dull gray, the clouds thick and heavy like the weight pressing against her chest. She stepped outside, the cool air biting at her skin, and for a moment she felt relief. The whisper seemed to fade, just for a second, a brief moment of silence. But then she heard it again, this time clearer, like it was standing right next to her. "I am with you." She froze. The world seemed to stop around her. She stood in the middle of the courtyard, the breeze rustling, the leaves above, but nothing felt real anymore. The grass beneath her feet was no longer solid. The ground wavered like a mirage, and the world around her flickered like a faulty film reel. "I am always here." Emma's heart slammed against her ribs. She turned in a frantic circle, her hands outstretched, trying to grasp onto anything, but there was nothing. The courtyard was empty, the trees standing still, as silent as the school behind her. She was alone. But she wasn't. She couldn't stay here. Emma ran. Her footsteps were quick, urgent, her breaths shallow as she hurried back into the building. The whisper still clawed at the edges of her mind, pulling her forward, guiding her, or perhaps leading her somewhere. She didn't know anymore. The hallways seemed endless, twisting, turning in on themselves, until she reached the familiar entrance of the library once again. The door was still there, as if it had never changed, never been disturbed. But something was different. The air was colder now. The faint scent of mildew mixed with something older, something deeper. As Emma stood there staring at the door, she realized something. It wasn't just the library anymore. It was the door that had been waiting. The door that had been there before she even knew it existed. Her hands trembled as she reached out for the handle. It was open. Inside, the lights flickered, casting long shadows across the rows of bookshelves. The silence was suffocating. Emma stepped inside, her body instinctively tensing as she looked around, half expecting something to move, to emerge, from the darkness. The whisper was louder now, no longer a voice in her mind, but a sound she could almost hear. "You can't run from me. You're already mine." Her breath caught in her throat. She turned, and for the first time, she saw it. The Watcher. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was standing before her, tall, formless, its dark shape blurring the edges of reality itself. Its presence filled the room, suffocating, pressing in on her until she couldn't breathe. It moved toward her, slow and deliberate, as though it were savoring each step. The air grew colder, more unbearable. The shadows stretched out, curling around her, pulling her in. And then it spoke. Not in her mind, but out loud. "You are mine now. You always were." Her body froze, her mind spiraling, the edges of her vision blurring as she realized the terrifying truth. She was never meant to escape. The Watcher had been watching her long before she ever stepped foot into this school. It had known her, marked her, followed her. And now, it was time for her to belong. Emma's fingers tightened around the journal, the one thing that had ever made sense, the one thing that had been hers, the one thing she could control. She couldn't run anymore, but there was still a flicker of defiance in her chest. Not yet. Not while she still had a choice. Don't wait to find out what happens next. Hit the like button, share the story with your friends, and subscribe for more spine-tingling paranormal stories. And don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments. What Would you do if you were trapped in a haunted school? Could you survive the Watcher's grip?